The clinking of silverware echoed across the polished mahogany table, a sound so refined it almost mocked me. My mother had chosen the grand dining room for this evening, its chandelier dripping with light, its curtains heavy and gold, its air thick with the smell of roasted lamb and spiced wine. She always reserved this room for moments she considered important. To her, tonight was one of those moments. To me, it became the night that broke something I'd been holding together inside for far too long. I sat at the far end of the table, shoulders tucked inward, trying to make myself small. My older sister, Evelyn, lounged like a queen across from me, dressed in a silk blouse the color of champagne. My brother, Daniel, had his tie loosened but wore the same smug ease he always carried, like life had already promised him it would bend in his favor. My father was in his usual place at the head, his mouth hidden behind his glass, his silence as steady and suffocating as the ticking of the old grandfather clock in the corner. And then there was my mother. She sat with her spine ruler straight, her pearls glinting against her neck, eyes sharp with the satisfaction of an actress about to deliver her favorite line. "You know," she said, setting down her wine glass with a delicate tap, "it's such a relief to see how well Evelyn and Daniel are doing. Your grandfather would be proud." Her gaze slid over to me like I was an afterthought, something she had nearly forgotten to acknowledge. "And as for you, Anna," she paused long enough to make sure everyone's attention had shifted my way. Her lips curled into a smile that was nothing but blade. "Well, you've always been too useless to inherit anything, haven't you?" The words landed like a slap. A hush fell over the table, broken only by the soft snicker that escaped from Evelyn. Daniel followed, chuckling under his breath as if my humiliation were a shared joke between them. My mother's eyes glittered, pleased with herself, while my father stared into his plate, carving lamb with surgical precision, saying nothing. Always nothing. Heat crawled up my throat, burning my cheeks. I wanted to speak, to deny her words, to fight back, but my tongue felt like it had been nailed to the roof of my mouth. Instead, I shifted in my seat, fingers tightening around my fork until the metal dug into my palm. I stared at my plate, at the glossy sheen of butter on the carrots, and forced myself not to cry. I would not give them that satisfaction. "Don't be cruel, Mother," Evelyn said sweetly, though her smirk betrayed her. "Anna has her charms." She tilted her head in mock sympathy. "Even if none of them are very useful." Daniel laughed louder this time, lifting his glass. "To Evelyn's new promotion, then, and to me for closing on the house next month." He raised his drink high, waiting for the others to follow, and they did. My mother clinked her glass against his with unrestrained pride, her smile blooming as if she had birthed champions. Evelyn joined in, basking in the glow of their approval. My father lifted his glass mechanically, dutiful, while his eyes stayed fixed on the red wine swirling inside. The toast traveled down the table like a river, but it stopped at me. No one waited for me to raise my glass. No one even glanced my way. I was invisible, excluded, a shadow on the edge of their celebration. My siblings laughed and told stories about their bright futures. Evelyn talking about the luxury apartment she was moving into, Daniel boasting about square footage and backyard views, while my mother nodded and encouraged them, her face a portrait of pride. And me. I was the ghost at the table, the forgotten one, the burden they tolerated only out of obligation. My mind began to drift backward, against my will, to all the moments that had shaped this cruel ritual. The spelling bee I'd won in the 5th grade. My mother hadn't come. She'd been too busy attending one of Evelyn's ballet recitals. The job I'd struggled to land after college. When I called to share the news, she told me not to get too comfortable because people like you never last long. Even the night I came home in tears after being passed over for a promotion I had worked myself raw to earn, her response had been a shrug and a cold. "What did you expect? Not everyone is meant to succeed." Now here she was, confirming it once more, sealing it into stone with her words, too useless to inherit anything. As the laughter rose and glasses clinked again, I stared harder at my plate. I let the voices blur into static. My fork was still clenched in my hand, so tightly I could feel the metal imprinting its teeth into my skin. My eyes burned, but I refused to let tears fall. Not here. Not in front of them. In that moment, something shifted in me. It wasn't just pain, it was anger, molten and quiet, flowing into places that had been numb for years. I realized I was finished waiting for scraps of kindness, finished hoping for recognition that would never come. If they wanted me to be the shadow, then fine. But I would not be the silent shadow forever. As the meal ended and my siblings moved on to bragging about vacations and inheritances not yet written into paper, I kept my head down, nodding as if their world didn't pierce mine. But inside, I was engraving every smirk, every whisper, every glance of dismissal into memory. My mother's words would not fade with the evening. They would mark me, fuel me, harden me. When dessert was served, I barely touched it. When the laughter grew too loud, I pushed my chair back. And when my mother looked at me with that smug satisfaction, I met her gaze just long enough for her to see the fire in mine. I didn't speak a word. I didn't need to. By the time I walked out of that dining room, the echo of her insult still ringing in my ears, I knew I would never forget this night. Someday, I told myself, I would return it to her, multiplied. Someday she would realize the cost of dismissing me. But for now, I walked into the cold night air, gripping my car keys so hard they dug into my palm, eyes burning not with tears but with resolve. And in the silence of that drive home, I made myself a vow. I would remember this night for the rest of my life. My name is Anna Whitmore. I'm 29 years old, and for as long as I can remember, I've been the invisible one. The third child in a family that only ever had room for 2 shining stars. If Evelyn was the diamond, perfect, sparkling, polished, then Daniel was the golden boy. Athletic, ambitious, charming, and me, I was the quiet one, the clumsy one. The one who always trailed a few steps behind, hoping someone might turn around and notice. They never did. I grew up in a house that looked perfect from the outside. White columns, red brick, hydrangeas that bloomed bright and proud every summer. The kind of house people slow down to stare at. But inside, everything was performance. Our family photos hung like stage props on the walls, smiling faces captured at just the right angles, but always missing something behind the eyes. Mom was the director of it all. She orchestrated every holiday, every party, every achievement like it was a scene in the life she believed she deserved. And Evelyn and Daniel. They were her stars. I was barely a supporting role. I still remember my 7th birthday. I'd begged for a bicycle. Nothing fancy, just something with pink handlebars and a little basket in front. I watched the commercials with wide eyes for weeks. But when the day came, there was no bike, no ribbons. Just a plain envelope with a glittery card and a $5 bill. Evelyn got a pony on her 7th birthday. Daniel got a trampoline and a magician. I got a pat on the head and a rushed, happy birthday before Mom went back to organizing Evelyn's riding lessons. I used to think there was something wrong with me. I wasn't loud enough, pretty enough, confident enough. I stuttered when I got nervous. I cried too easily. I was the kind of child who stood at the edge of the playground, watching the others play, wondering what it felt like to be chosen first. At school, I worked hard, quietly, desperately. I'd stay up late practicing my spelling lists, rewriting essays 3 times just to make sure they were perfect. When I made honor roll for the first time, I ran home, clutching the certificate like it was gold. Mom barely looked at it. "You should have gotten top marks like Evelyn did in her class," she said, flipping through her phone. "She's going to be valedictorian, you know." She always found a way to turn my pride into shame. Daniel won a soccer trophy once. It was 3rd place. My mother hosted a party like he'd won the World Cup. When I got 2nd place in the science fair, she asked, "Why not 1st?" That was the rhythm of my childhood, always reaching, always falling short, No matter what I did, it was never enough, not compared to them. But there was one person who never made me feel small. My grandfather. Grandpa Whitmore wasn't flashy like the rest of my family. He had calloused hands from a lifetime of woodworking and a voice like gravel and honey. He smelled like cedar and pipe smoke and old books, and when he looked at me, really looked, it felt like being seen for the first time in days. He used to sneak me peanut brittle behind Mom's back, told me not to let her catch me with sugar teeth, as he called them. But more than that, he gave me something I never got from anyone else in that house: affirmation. When I was 12, I wrote a story for English class about a girl who lived in a lighthouse and kept the storms at bay with her voice. It wasn't great. My grammar was messy and I overwrote everything, but it was mine. My teacher gave me a silver star and I couldn't wait to show Grandpa. He read it slowly, glasses low on his nose, his fingers tracing each line like it was a treasure map. "You've got fire in you, kid," he said, tapping the page. "Don't let them convince you you're made of ashes." That night, I found a folded note under my plate at dinner. Grandpa's handwriting, cramped and slanted. "They only see what sparkles, but stars are born in the dark. You're more than they know. Keep going." I still have it, pressed between the pages of an old copy of Little Women he gave me for Christmas one year, even though my mother scoffed and said, "She's not much of a reader." He gave me more than gifts. He gave me quiet strength. Sometimes he'd let me sit in the workshop with him while he carved intricate wooden figures. He said I had the hands of a creator, not a destroyer. Said that I watched the world like someone who wanted to understand it, not conquer it. He believed in me in a way no one else ever did. My mother hated how close we were. She said he was coddling me, that he was feeding my delusions of talent and promise. "She's never going to be anything, Dad," she snapped once. I heard it from the hallway, standing frozen just beyond the frame of the door. "You're wasting your time. She's not like Evelyn. She doesn't have that spark." I stood there, heart pounding, too afraid to move, too hurt to cry. I was 14. That day, Grandpa found me in the backyard, sitting in the grass, ripping petals off the daisies. He didn't say anything at first, just sat down beside me, knees cracking like old furniture. Then he said quietly, "There are things in this life that shine, Anna, and there are things that last. You're the latter. Don't let their noise drown out your voice." I think I held onto that moment like a life raft for years. Because the truth is, if not for Grandpa, I might have believed her. Believed I was nothing, that I was born wrong, that my softness was weakness, that my silence was failure, that the only way to matter in the world was to be loud and beautiful and applauded. But Grandpa taught me something different. He taught me that there is power in staying true to yourself, even when the world pretends you don't exist. He died when I was 23. A quiet heart attack in his sleep. My mother didn't even cry at the funeral. Evelyn and Daniel looked bored during the service, but me, I wept like a child. I lost my compass that day. The only person who ever made me feel like I wasn't invisible. And yet, in some strange way, I didn't feel completely alone, because I had his words, his notes, his quiet belief in me stored in the corners of my soul. Even now, 6 years later, when the world tries to tell me I'm nothing, I hear his voice. "Keep going." So I did. But I never forgot what it felt like to be the shadow in a house full of stars, to be the one overlooked, underestimated, cast aside. I never forgot how easily my mother labeled me, how proudly she clipped my wings. And one day I knew she'd regret it. They all would. By the time I turned 25, the gap between me and my siblings had grown into a canyon. Evelyn had landed a job in fashion marketing right out of college. Thanks, of course, to one of Mom's golf club friends who just happened to be the hiring manager. Within a year, she had her own office, a company car, and a designer wardrobe that seemed to grow faster than her resume. Evelyn always knew how to perform success, and Mom knew how to package her for the world. Daniel was no different. He'd bounced from college to real estate, armed with charm and a starter fund my parents gifted him for future investments. That starter fund turned into a new condo, then another. Daniel liked to flip houses and brag about it. He called it entrepreneurship. I called it privilege with a glossy finish. And me, I was folding sweaters at a department store during the day and waiting tables at night. I'd tried to make something of myself after Grandpa died, took out loans to enroll in a creative writing program. But when my car broke down mid-semester, I missed too many classes and couldn't keep up. I asked my mother for help. Just a few $100s to fix the car, I told her. I promised to pay it back. She looked at me over the rim of her wine glass and said, "If you can't afford school, you shouldn't be in it. Maybe it's time to face facts. You're not cut out for the real world, Anna." That was the end of that conversation. No car, no school, no future. I dropped out and picked up more shifts. Daniel got a second condo that year. Evelyn posted photos from Santorini. I moved into a basement apartment with mold on the ceiling and a landlord who forgot to fix the heat in winter. There was no safety net for me, no care package, no advice, no mentorship, just judgment from a distance. I tried to stay connected, holidays, birthdays, family dinners. But even those turned into stages for my siblings to shine and for me to be paraded as a cautionary tale. "Still working at that restaurant?" Mom would ask loudly during Christmas dinner in front of my aunts and uncles. "You know, Evelyn managed to buy a BMW this year. Maybe you should ask her how she did it." She said it with a smile, as if it were a helpful suggestion, but there was no mistaking the blade beneath her words. I remember one night especially well. I'd driven in from the city for a family dinner, already exhausted from a double shift, but desperate for some kind of warmth. I brought a store-bought pie because I couldn't afford the ingredients to bake one from scratch. I even wore a blouse I'd found at a thrift store just to look presentable. When I walked into the house, it was like stepping into a showroom. Candles flickered on every table. Evelyn was laughing in the kitchen, and Daniel was bragging about his latest listing. Mom barely acknowledged me, except to gesture toward the coat closet and mutter, "Try not to bring in too much of that city grime." I stood in the doorway, pie in hand, unsure whether to laugh or cry. At dinner, the conversation circled around their latest accomplishments. Evelyn's boyfriend had proposed. There was already talk of a vineyard wedding. Daniel had sold a house to a local news anchor. Mom beamed like she'd birthed royalty. Then someone, I don't even remember who, asked me how I was doing. I started to answer cautiously. "Well, I'm saving up to," my mother cut in, waving her hand. "Anna's just finding herself," she said, tone syrupy and sharp. "She's always been a bit lost, haven't you, dear?" The room chuckled. Evelyn smirked behind her wine glass. Daniel looked away, and I sat there, cheeks burning, the fork in my hand trembling like it had a pulse of its own. That was the moment she labeled me again, this time in front of everyone. "Dead weight," she added, laughing. "But we carry her anyway." The words didn't just land. They stuck. They clung to the walls, to my skin, to the marrow of my bones. I said nothing. Just smiled faintly and excused myself a few minutes later, pretending I had an early shift. No one stopped me. No one followed me out. I walked to my car in the dark, coat thin against the sharp wind, headlights from the house casting my shadow long across the gravel driveway. I stood there for a long time, hand on the door, watching the flickering warmth of the windows, knowing I wasn't welcome in that glow. That house had never been mine. That family had never really been mine. As the cold seeped into my fingertips, I thought about Grandpa again, how he would have never let anyone speak to me like that, how he would have handed me his coat without hesitation, told me to ignore them, reminded me I was worth something. But he was gone, and all I had left was the silence he left behind and the cruel chorus my family repeated over and over, useless. Lost. Dead weight. I got into the car, turned the key, and sat there as the engine warmed, staring at my reflection in the rearview mirror. My eyes looked tired, older than 29. But there was something else there, too. A flicker. A pulse of heat beneath the surface. They didn't see it. They never had, but I did. And I knew one day they would too. They would remember every word they'd thrown at me like stones, and I would be the one standing steady while their world cracked beneath them. But for now, I drove back to my tiny apartment, headlights cutting through the dark, wind howling against the windows. And in that cold silence, I carried the weight of every insult like it was kindling. Because one day I would burn it all down, with truth, not rage, and they'd finally see who I had been all along. When the call came, I was on my lunch break, huddled behind the restaurant where I worked, half-eaten sandwich in one hand, phone buzzing in the other. The hostess had tears in her voice. "Anna, I'm so sorry. It's your grandfather." The world shifted like someone had pulled the floor out from under me. He'd been fine just last week. We'd spoken on the phone. He told me he was proud of me for working hard, for standing on my own 2 feet. "Keep building," he said. "Even if they never clap, build anyway." Now he was gone. Heart failure, they said, peaceful in his sleep. I didn't cry right away. Not until I got home and found the old note he'd tucked into my birthday card the year I turned 25. "Some plants take longer to bloom. That doesn't mean they won't." That's when I broke. The funeral was held at the family church, white pews, stained glass windows, lilies lined up like ghosts down the aisle. The pastor spoke about legacy, about faith, about the pillars of the community. My mother dabbed her eyes with a silk handkerchief. Evelyn wore all black, of course, but still managed to look like she was modeling grief. Daniel stood stiff, frowning just enough for the cameras, but I could see it. The calculation. Grief hadn't even cooled in the room before the whispers began. My mother sat between Evelyn and Daniel in the front pew, her voice low, clipped. "I know he updated the will last year," she muttered. "It'll all go to you too, of course. Anna wouldn't know what to do with real money. She can barely manage her rent." I sat 2 rows behind, still and silent, pretending not to hear. I had come to say goodbye. They had come to collect. After the service, we gathered at the family home. Grandpa's absence rang louder than any conversation. I wandered the halls, fingers trailing the wallpaper, half expecting him to step out from his den and hand me one of his secret peppermint candies. But there was no peppermint, no pipe smoke, no soft hum of a woodworking project in the garage, just the clink of champagne glasses and the hushed tones of vultures circling. "He said he wanted me to have the lake cabin," Daniel murmured to my mother. "And I'm sure the stocks will go to me," Evelyn chimed in. "He always said I had a good head for business." Mother smiled like a queen surveying her kingdom. "He was sentimental, but he wasn't foolish. Of course it'll all stay in the family, our part of the family." She didn't even try to lower her voice when I walked in. I felt like a ghost floating through rooms filled with people who pretended to grieve while secretly calculating net worth and tax brackets. No one asked how I was holding up. No one remembered that I used to sit at Grandpa's feet while he read old sea stories to me, his voice low and gravelly, making me promise I'd write something of my own one day. No one recalled that I was the one who visited him last Christmas when the others were on ski trips or spa retreats. That I brought him soup when he caught the flu last winter. That I stayed on the phone with him for hours when he felt lonely. To them, I didn't count. I never had. But to him, I did. And part of me held onto that as I sat in the lawyer's office a week later, surrounded by my mother and siblings. It was sterile and quiet, the kind of room that smelled like printer ink and old secrets. Leather chairs, polished floors, a desk too large for any one person to need. We were seated in a row, like contestants waiting to be handed a prize. Evelyn crossed her legs delicately. Daniel scrolled on his phone. My mother adjusted her pearl necklace 3 times in 5 minutes. I sat on the edge of my seat, knees pressed together, palms sweating. My heart thudded so loudly I was sure everyone could hear it. The lawyer, a man with thin glasses and a voice like cold water, cleared his throat. "We're here today to execute the final will and testament of Mr. Robert Whitmore." My mother leaned forward, expectant. He continued, reading through the legal preamble, the ceremonial language that meant nothing until it suddenly meant everything. To my grandson, Daniel Whitmore, I leave the red cedar canoe we built together in 2015. May it remind you of patience. Daniel blinked. That was it. My mother frowned. To my granddaughter, Evelyn Whitmore, I leave my old Olympus film camera. You always saw the world through your own lens. May you keep capturing it. A camera. Evelyn's jaw twitched. My mother straightened, tension rippling off her like heat. And to my granddaughter, Anna Whitmore. The room stilled. Everyone turned to look at me, as if this was the part where he left me a watch or perhaps a book, maybe a kind word. The lawyer paused. I request to speak to Miss Whitmore privately regarding the remainder of the estate. Silence. Thick, stunned, electric. What? My mother snapped. That has to be a mistake. The lawyer removed his glasses. It's not. Mr. Whitmore left explicit instructions. The full remainder of the estate will be discussed with Miss Whitmore alone. Daniel looked confused. Evelyn looked furious. My mother looked like someone had just poured cold water down her back. She doesn't even own a houseplant, Evelyn scoffed. Surely you don't expect her to handle. This meeting is adjourned, the lawyer said firmly, standing. Miss Whitmore, if you'll stay behind. I didn't move. I couldn't, not at first. My mother stood, trembling with rage. This is absurd. He knew she wasn't capable. He also knew her better than any of you ever did, the lawyer replied, voice cold. They left in a storm of protest and whispers, and then I was alone. The door clicked shut. The lawyer turned to me and smiled, not warmly but not unkindly either. Anna, he said, your grandfather left you everything. The silence in the lawyer's office felt like a second skin, tight, unbreathable, pressing against every inch of me. I stared at him, unsure if I had heard correctly. I'm sorry, what did you just say? The lawyer, Mr. Halpern, as his nameplate reminded me, folded his hands on the desk. Your grandfather named you the sole beneficiary of his estate, Miss Whitmore. He said it like it was the most ordinary thing in the world. But it wasn't. Not to me. Not to the girl who was always seated at the kids' table long after she'd become an adult. Not to the woman who brought a thrift store pie to Christmas and got laughed at. Not to the one labeled useless, dead weight, a burden. I blinked at him, trying to find my voice. You mean, the house, he nodded. The house, the land it sits on, his entire savings account, retirement funds, investments, assets, all of it. It's yours, Anna. My mouth went dry. All of it? Yes, he said gently. Every last cent. It felt like the world tilted just slightly. I gripped the arms of the leather chair, afraid that if I let go, I'd drift into some surreal dream and never wake up. My heart was hammering, not with joy, not yet, something closer to disbelief, or fear, or both. I don't understand, I whispered. Why? He slid a folder across the table, thick, heavy, legal documents stamped and signed with my name on them, but it was the sealed envelope on top that made my breath hitch. He left you a letter, Mr. Halpern said. Said you'd need to read it alone, said it would explain everything. I stared at it. My name written in Grandpa's old, slanted script. Anna. Just seeing it broke something loose in my chest. I didn't open it right away. I couldn't. Not with eyes on me. Not while I was still trying to keep my heart from slipping out of my ribs. Mr. Halpern waited patiently, folding his hands again like a man used to dealing with the stunned and grieving. Your grandfather was very intentional, he said after a moment. He didn't want your mother or siblings to contest the will. That's why he made sure every document was triple notarized. Every asset transferred ahead of time, quietly. All legal challenges are already closed. I could barely process the words. You mean they can't take it from me? They can't touch it? I sat back in the chair, dazed. My mind ran in every direction, looping in confusion and disbelief. How had he done this? Why had he gone through so much trouble for me? The man who once slipped me peppermint candies and told me stories about women who ruled kingdoms had left me an empire. Mr. Halpern hesitated. Then he said, Would you like to know his reasoning? I nodded, too stunned to speak. He opened another folder, pulling out a typed page that looked like a personal addendum to the will. Robert Whitmore wrote, he began reading, "I leave my estate to Anna not because of charity or pity, but because of character. She has been dismissed by many, yet has never stopped rising. She has built herself from nothing. She listens more than she speaks, and when she speaks, it is with truth. She was the only one who ever truly saw me, not for what I gave, but for who I was." My throat tightened. My vision blurred. "He believed in you," the lawyer said. "Deeply." I could barely look up. I nodded, wiping my eyes with the sleeve of my coat. "He told me," Mr. Halpern continued, "that the others were always in love with the idea of inheritance. You were the only one who ever showed love without expecting anything back." I didn't know what to say to that, so I said nothing. For the first time in years, I felt known. And yet the joy wasn't clean. It came entangled with a thick knot of fear because I knew my family. I knew their entitlement, their pride, their obsession with appearances. This, me inheriting everything, wouldn't just upset them. It would enrage them. They'd call it theft. They'd call me manipulative. They'd tear apart every memory we ever shared trying to prove I didn't deserve it. Mr. Halpern must have seen the panic cross my face. "Your grandfather anticipated their reaction," he said. "He arranged for the trust to be protected. They can scream, but they can't change a thing." Still, I hesitated. "I don't want a war," I said softly. Mr. Halpern raised an eyebrow. "You didn't start one." That stayed with me. I left the office with a manila envelope pressed to my chest. Inside were keys, account details, title deeds. And the letter I still hadn't opened. Outside, the sky was cloudy, the wind biting through my coat. But I didn't feel cold. Not really. I sat in my car, parked on the curb outside the law office, staring at the steering wheel. I should have been smiling, shouting, calling someone, but I didn't call anyone. Who would I call? Certainly not my mother, not Evelyn, not Daniel. They didn't deserve to know, not yet. So I drove home. Back to the basement apartment with the mold on the ceiling. Back to the second-hand couch and the dripping faucet and the tiny fridge that moaned when it ran. I walked in, set the folder down, and sat on the floor with the letter. I opened it slowly, hands trembling. "My Anna, if you're reading this, then I'm gone. But don't be afraid. You were always stronger than you knew, and smarter than they ever gave you credit for. They'll be angry. Let them. That anger is proof of what they lost and what you gained. I left you everything because you are the only one who knows what it's like to fight for something real. I trust you to use it wisely, to make something of your life not because you inherited it, but because you earned it the hard way. Build, write, rest, dream. You have space now. Let no one shrink you again. And remember, stars are born in darkness. With love, Grandpa." I cried. For the first time since the funeral, I let the tears come, not just for his death, but for everything he had given me in life and in death. I didn't tell anyone for days. I returned calls but didn't mention the will. I let Evelyn text her assumptions. Let Daniel send emails asking about next steps with the estate. Let my mother plan her vacation to Charleston, assuming she'd have enough inheritance to cover it. I said nothing. I waited. Let the silence stretch, like a wire pulled tight between us. Because something inside me was shifting, and I wanted them to feel it, the calm before the storm. The sky was unnaturally blue the morning of the will reading, crisp, cloudless, like the universe had cleaned its canvas just for the drama about to unfold. I stood outside Halpern and Associates, the folder tucked under my arm, heels clicking on the concrete like punctuation marks. Inside, they were already seated. Evelyn had chosen her signature black pantsuit with gold buttons and a designer purse placed just so beside her chair. Daniel wore a blazer with no tie, confident, casual, self-assured. My mother had on her morning pearls, lips painted the same shade of ambition she wore to fundraisers and board meetings. Her nails were sharp and red, her posture straighter than a fence post. They looked like a trio of lions waiting to devour a fresh kill, and I was the one holding the knife. "Ah, Miss Whitmore," Mr. Halpern greeted, standing as I walked in. "We're ready to begin." I nodded once and sat at the far end of the table, where I always sat during family dinners, at holidays, at weddings. The invisible end. Only this time I was far from invisible. Mr. Halpern opened a thick, leather-bound folder and adjusted his glasses. "Thank you all for coming. As you know, we are here to read the final will and testament of Robert Whitmore. Mr. Whitmore passed on the 3rd of last month, and this document, updated and notarized within the last year, outlines his final wishes." I glanced around the table. Evelyn already had that triumphant glint in her eye. Daniel sat back, one leg crossed over the other, relaxed as if this were a formality before a big payday. My mother didn't even blink, so sure of the narrative she had already written in her head. They all thought this day would end with champagne. Mr. Halpern cleared his throat. "To my grandson, Daniel Whitmore, I leave my cedar canoe hand-built in the summer of 2015. Daniel shifted. The smile on his face flickered. Sorry, did you say canoe?" Mr. Halpern didn't respond. He turned a page. "To my granddaughter, Evelyn Whitmore, I leave my Olympus film camera and my journals of travel photography." Evelyn blinked rapidly. "Wait, what?" My mother's head whipped toward him. "That's it," Mr. Halpern continued without pause. "To my daughter, Margaret Whitmore." My mother straightened smugly. "I leave the family Bible passed down from my mother. May it remind you of humility." I had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from gasping. Evelyn let out a soft, scandalized, "What the hell?" And then Mr. Halpern looked directly at me. "And to my granddaughter, Anna Whitmore, I leave the remainder of my estate, including the family home, the adjoining land, investment accounts, liquid assets, stocks, personal belongings, and business holdings. She is named sole heir and executor." The room broke. "What?" my mother shrieked. Daniel sat bolt upright. "That can't be right." Evelyn slammed her hand on the table. "He was senile. He didn't know what he was doing." Mr. Halpern remained calm, flipping pages. "All documents were signed, notarized, and witnessed. Mr. Whitmore's mental fitness was reviewed and confirmed in writing by 2 independent physicians. There are recordings, statements, legal protections in place to ensure the will cannot be contested." My mother was standing now, trembling with fury. No, absolutely not. She's useless. She can't handle this. She's never handled anything in her life." Daniel stared at me, slack-jawed. "This has to be a mistake." Evelyn leaned forward, eyes narrowed like a hawk. "What did you do, Anna? Did you manipulate him, guilt him, cry poor like always?" I didn't speak right away. I let them unravel. I watched their smugness evaporate, watched the realization creep into their perfect, painted faces. They had already spent the money in their minds, had already picked out new cars, upgrades, vacations. But the money was never theirs. It was mine. And now they couldn't pretend otherwise. When I finally stood, the room fell into a tense, trembling silence. I looked at each of them in turn. My mother, who had once laughed while calling me dead weight in front of a dozen relatives. Evelyn, who used to pull my hair behind closed doors and call me pathetic. Daniel, who'd never even asked how I paid my rent while they went on ski trips. I met their eyes without blinking. "You all spent your lives assuming I had nothing to offer," I said, voice steady. "You told me I was a burden, a failure, an embarrassment." Evelyn opened her mouth, but I raised a hand. "You talked over me, around me, about me, but never to me. You never listened. You never asked who I was or what I wanted or what I could build." I turned to my mother. "You told me I was too useless to inherit anything, and now I've inherited everything." Her face blanched. Her mouth hung open in a frozen gasp, but no words came. "I didn't ask for this," I continued, softer now. "I didn't expect it, but Grandpa saw something in me. He saw what none of you ever did." Evelyn let out a bitter laugh. "He pitied you." "No," I said. "He trusted me because I never wanted his money. I just wanted to be seen, heard, loved. And now, I don't need any of you to give me that. I found it without you." Daniel was pale, his jaw clenched, arms folded across his chest like a child who just had their toy taken away. "I'm not going to beg you to understand," I said. "And I'm not going to apologize, not anymore." The air was thick with rage, confusion, denial, and I let it all wash over me. It was the most power I had ever felt in my life, not because I had money, but because I no longer needed their approval. Their validation. Their crumbs. I turned to Mr. Halpern. "Is there anything else?" He shook his head. "That concludes the reading." I nodded, and then I walked out. I didn't look back. Behind me, I heard my mother's voice rising again, desperate and sharp. Evelyn muttering about lawyers. Daniel slamming a hand against the table, but I didn't turn around. I walked into the bright morning, heels echoing on the marble floor of the office building, each step lighter than the last. I had spent my entire life being underestimated, ignored, stepped over. Today, I became undeniable. And when the door closed behind me, I smiled for the first time in a long, long time. The first night I slept in Grandpa's house, I cried. Not because I was sad, not because I missed him, though I did, achingly, but because for the first time in my life I felt safe, anchored. Home. I walked through every room that evening in silence. My footsteps echoed softly against the hardwood floors. The house was exactly as he left it, clean, warm, humble in its own way. No pretension. Just books, old furniture, handmade shelves, and the familiar scent of cedar and pipe tobacco. I opened the front windows and let the breeze flow in, carrying the sounds of crickets and rustling leaves. I stood there in the moonlight, barefoot on the cool floorboards, and breathed. This was mine, not because I'd stolen it, not because I begged for it, but because someone saw me, really, truly saw me, and believed I could carry the weight of something meaningful. I spent the first few weeks just settling in, fixing little things, painting the front porch railing, rearranging furniture, planting new wildflowers in the garden like the ones Grandpa used to point out during our walks. I moved slowly, intentionally. It was healing in motion, and for a while it was quiet until the calls started. At first, it was Daniel. "Hey," he said, fake casual. "Just wanted to check in. No hard feelings, right? I mean, it was Grandpa's choice, but maybe we could figure something out, like a loan, just until I flip my next property." I told him no. Kindly, firmly, he called me selfish and hung up. Then Evelyn texted. "I know we've never been close, but we're sisters. I'm getting married soon. The wedding's going to be beautiful. You should come. You could even help fund it as family." I didn't reply. A week later, she posted a passive-aggressive quote on Instagram. "Money doesn't buy class." I smiled. And then came my mother. She didn't call. She showed up. I watched from behind the living room curtains as her black SUV pulled into the driveway. She stepped out like she still owned the place. Heels sharp against the gravel, coat pressed and perfect, lips pursed like she was bracing for a speech. I didn't open the door. I waited until she rang the bell a third time. When I finally let her in, she walked past me without a word, inspecting the foyer as if assessing damage. "It smells like old wood in here," she said. "It's cedar," I replied. "Grandpa liked it." She turned to me. "Anna, be reasonable. This house is far too much for you. The land, the maintenance, the taxes, it's not sustainable. You're not prepared." I crossed my arms, meeting her gaze evenly. "Funny. Grandpa thought I was." She ignored that. "The smart thing to do would be to sell, split the money 3 ways, keep the peace." I laughed then, quiet, almost tender. "You didn't care about peace when you called me deadweight in front of our family." Her eyes narrowed. "That was a joke." "No, it wasn't, and even if it was, it hurt, for years, and you never apologized." She stood still, blinking rapidly. I'd never seen her caught off guard before. It looked almost human. "You're making a mistake," she said finally. "No," I said. "I'm making a life." I walked her to the door. She didn't resist. But just before stepping out, she turned to me and said, "You'll be alone in this house, Anna. Don't come crying to us when it all falls apart." I didn't reply. I simply closed the door behind her and locked it. That night, I lit a fire in the hearth. sat in Grandpa's old armchair with a blanket and a cup of tea. I stared into the flames and I felt full, not of rage, not of bitterness, of peace. For so long I had carried their cruelty like it was my name, like I owed them something, like love had to be earned through suffering. But here, in this quiet home with its creaky floors and familiar smells, I remembered something deeper. I had never been useless. I had been overlooked. Dismissed, diminished, but never worthless. Every insult they hurled at me had become a brick in the foundation I now stood on, and I stood tall. I started writing again, real writing. I carved out a small study in the sunroom and filled it with books and notebooks and scribbled ideas. I wrote about strength, about silence, about women who were underestimated until they weren't. I made peace with my past by putting it into words. Some nights, I'd sit on the back porch and talk to the stars. Not out loud, just in my mind. I'd imagine Grandpa sitting beside me, pipe in hand, nodding along as I told him about the small victories, the way the daffodils had bloomed early, or how the neighbor's cat kept sneaking into the garden. And always I ended with the same thought. You were right. I'm not ashes, I'm fire. It wasn't about the money. It never had been. It was about the faith he put in me when no one else did. The quiet, steady way he watered my spirit when everyone else tried to bury it. One afternoon, I found a slip of paper tucked into the back of his favorite book. His handwriting, faded but familiar. To the one they underestimated, go build something they can't ignore. I framed it, hung it above the fireplace. And now, whenever I light the fire, I see it glowing there like a blessing. They still talk, I'm sure. Evelyn makes snide comments on social media. Daniel's probably telling people I cheated my way into the will. Mom likely rewrites history every time she hosts a garden party, but none of it touches me now. Their words, their opinions, their entitlement, it all used to sting. Now it's just noise in the distance, like a storm that never arrives. Because I have something they'll never understand. Peace, purpose, roots, and the unshakable knowledge that I didn't just inherit land or money, I inherited truth. I inherited freedom. I inherited Grandpa's faith in me, and that, above all, is priceless. They said I was too useless to inherit anything, but I inherited everything that matters.